Have you ever had that feeling, maybe when you're trying to absorb a lot of information quickly, that some really crucial piece seems to be missing? Or maybe the whole system itself just isn't built for you?
Uh-huh. That feeling.
Well, today we're taking a deep dive into a pretty powerful and honestly often frustrating question.
Which is.
Why do universities frequently seem to deny access or the right support for autistic students, even when there's pretty clear evidence about what actually works?
Indeed, it's a critical question. We'll be exploring insights mainly from Dr. Jaime Hoerricks' writing, specifically her piece, When Evidence Isn't Enough: Why Universities Refuse Autistic Access.
Okay.
And that piece draws really heavily on a significant study from 2019 by Accardo, Cooter, and Woodruff.
Right.
It's a deep look, really, into this tension between, proven needs and what feels like institutional resistance.
So our mission today is really to unpack that core issue. Why is it that despite solid research, despite autistic students consistently saying what helps them thrive, why do those supports often just fail to materialize? You might think, oh, it's just a lack of understanding. But as we'll see, it seems to be far more complex, maybe even more deliberate than that.
That's the territory we're exploring.
Okay, let's start by unpacking the evidence then. That Accardo, Cooter, and Woodruff study you mentioned. It started with what sounds like a simple task. Or
Deceptively simple, yes.
they just asked autistic college students what accommodations they actually find useful.
Mm.
So what did they find? And why was this asking them so important?
Well, what's fascinating and kind of obvious when you think about it is how the study shifted the focus. It moved away from just like bureaucratic compliance, ticking boxes off a standard list.
Right, the usual paperwork drill.
Exactly. And instead, it focused on students' lived preferences, their genuine needs. And what came through overwhelmingly were consistent things.
Like what?
Predictability, distraction-free environments, clear written instructions were huge. And lecturers who actually demonstrate a real, authentic understanding, not just surface level.
Okay, that makes sense.
But they also highlighted things that are rarely offered, but often profoundly needed. Things like assessments in different formats, maybe not just a timed exam.
Ah.
Human interaction that feels genuinely supportive, not just, robotic or procedural. And flexible conditions around deadlines or participation sometimes.
It's really striking, isn't it, how these findings don't sound revolutionary. They sound like confirmation.
Exactly. Confirmation.
The author, Dr. Hoerricks, she mentions her own doctoral research from 2018 and then a 2024 article she co-wrote with her daughter, all pointing to the very same needs. So it feels like the evidence has been piling up for years.
It absolutely has.
Yet the institutions often seem to say, nope, not enough evidence, or that's not feasible.
And this really raises that bigger question. If you connect the dots, you see this universal pattern.
How so?
Autistic learners, across different settings, different countries even, they've been testifying to these same fundamental needs for decades.
So these individual stories, they're not just one-offs.
Not at all. They're part of a broad, consistent pattern. And it's a pattern validated by research time and again.
Okay, so the evidence is there, the pattern is clear. What happens then, in reality, when students actually ask for these things? You mentioned the author's experiences.
Right, this is where it gets, quite revealing. The reality often looks less like collaboration and maybe more like containment.
Containment? How do you mean?
Well, take the author's daughter's case. She attended a university, WGU, and they flatly refused her request for sensory tools, human grading for certain assignments, and flexible assessment formats.
Flatly refused. But why? Did they misunderstand?
That's the key thing. It wasn't presented as a misunderstanding. The reason given was that these requests would fundamentally alter the exam structure.
Ah, that phrase, fundamentally alter.
Exactly. It acts like a structural firewall, Once an accommodation gets labeled that way, the discussion just stops.
So the system basically says, yes, we hear you need this, but sorry, it's impossible for us to provide within our rules.
Pretty much. It acknowledges the need, but declares fulfilling it impossible.
And the author herself ran into something similar, a sort of double bind.
She did. She had a doctor's letter for accommodations that worked, imperfectly before the pandemic.
Okay.
But when COVID hit and everything shifted online, suddenly you've got glitchy, remote proctoring, constant surveillance.
Oh, yeah, that whole situation.
None of her existing traditional accommodations really fit that new digital landscape. It just wasn't designed with neurodivergent needs or really any flexibility in mind.
So what happened?
She ended up facing a lost semester and then a real struggle with her own university, LMU, just to try and rewrite her accommodations for this online world that, frankly, wasn't built for people like her.
Wow. That sounds incredibly stressful and unfair.
And the present truth, as she puts it, is that even now,
Yeah.
okay, maybe traditional letters for things like extended time might still open some doors.
Right, the standard stuff.
But the really crucial supports, especially for online learning and particularly for autistic students who might be Gestalt processors, like her and her daughter, those supports are often just categorically off the table.
Categorically off the table. Why?
Because the institutions argue they're too expensive, or too labor-intensive, or simply too disruptive to the standardized way of doing things.
So it comes back to system resistance, not just misunderstanding.
Exactly. It points clearly to systemic resistance.
That paints a really clear and, quite concerning picture of the student experience. But let's try and see it from the other side for a second. What's the underlying logic here? Why wouldn't access improve, even with evidence, even with legal mandates sometimes? What's really driving this?
This is where we really need to shift our lens. It's less about pedagogy, the methods of teaching, and more about political economy. Political economy, meaning the way universities actually operate, often like businesses. The insight here, according to the author, isn't just that they fail to understand, it's that they are actively prioritizing cost efficiency and standardization.
Over genuine accommodation.
Yes. Effectively, as the author argues, they're budgeting out access for disabled students. Every request gets run through this kind of unspoken calculation.
What's the calculation?
How much labor will this take? How much flexibility does it demand? How much trust in human judgment rather than automated systems? If the answer seems like too much,
then the request is denied.
That seems to be the pattern.
So anything requiring significant human input, a teacher really sitting down with a student, grading work thoughtfully, genuinely altering how something is assessed, that becomes a liability in this model.
It seems so. Instead, what we see is the rise, and it's accelerating, of standardization, automation, surveillance, education framed as logistics.
Not as a relational practice between people.
Precisely. And looking bigger picture, the post-pandemic world has just put fuel on this fire.
Yes.
We see tenure eroding, more adjuncts hired hourly with less security, curriculum bought off the shelf.
The whole package deal.
Right. The higher learning that's marketed often gets stripped of real curiosity, deep dialogue, knowledge for its own sake. It can become more like training for compliance, speed, performance.
So universities are selling this idea of human growth.
But operating internally with a business logic focused on minimizing costs. That's the tension the author highlights.
And the legal language we talked about, undue burden, fundamental alteration, that provides cover.
It provides perfect cover, arguably. These phrases become ready-made justifications to reject anything that doesn't fit the standardized, automated mold.
Which makes denial both legally defensible and, disturbingly, maybe even profitable or cost-effective for the institution.
That's the stark contradiction presented. Education sold as a human right, but managed increasingly like a commodity.
And disabled students, who often need exactly what the system is trying to eliminate: time, flexibility, human care, they become.
They become the wrong kind of cost in that model.
Wow. Okay, so given that underlying logic, that systemic drive for efficiency,
Yeah.
what does the future look like? Especially with EdTech, educational technology, becoming so dominant.
Well, the pattern seems almost predictable, doesn't it?
I'm almost afraid to ask.
We're seeing the huge platforms, Canvas, Blackboard, Brightspace, becoming the default infrastructure everywhere.
Yeah, they're ubiquitous.
And then you add in the remote proctoring companies measure, ProctorU, HonorLock, which are, let's be honest, basically surveillance companies.
Right. Monitoring students through their webcams.
And these products fundamentally aren't built for deep learning. They're built for efficiency, for compliance, for data extraction.
So accessibility.
Accessibility becomes an inefficiency in that model. It slows things down. It requires customization.
And this also allows schools to kind of outsource accountability.
That's a huge part of it. When an autistic student asks for something specific, the university can just shrug and point to the vendor. Sorry, the system doesn't support that feature.
Passing the buck.
Responsibility gets diluted, diffused, until basically no one person or department feels truly accountable for the lack of access.
So the trajectory seems pretty clear then.
It seems plain, based on this analysis. More automation, fewer human specialists, less room for human discretion.
Fewer tenured professors, more adjuncts, fewer counselors.
More chatbots, fewer meaningful accommodations, more blanket refusals based on the system.
That's chilling.
And the really chilling part, EdTech companies often openly brag about these efficiencies in their sales pitches.
They advertise the very logic that excludes people.
They announce the very logic that, according to Dr. Hoerricks, will systemically exclude students like her and her daughter. The cost saving, the standardization. It's not hidden in the subtext. It's the headline.
Oh.
And the consequence for autistic students, and likely other disabled students too, isn't accidental exclusion. It starts to look like exclusion by design, baked into the system.
That is a sobering trajectory. It really lays bare the choices being made, doesn't it? So, okay, we've taken this deep dive. We've seen how clear evidence about supporting autistic students often gets sidelined.
Right, systemic refusal.
Driven by what the author identifies as a kind of capitalist logic within higher education.
Which is then amplified, turbocharged even, by EdTech.
It's a powerful and, yeah, frankly, disheartening picture of how these systems can operate.
It is, and the core argument is that the system knows what would help on some level. The evidence is there, but it chooses not to act because of this underlying logic.
Budgeting out access.
Essentially, yes. Under this market logic, providing genuine access, the kind that requires slowing down, attending to difference, trusting human judgment, becomes a liability. It's forbidden by the drive for efficiency.
Which brings us to the author's provocative suggestion at the end. If the current system isn't just failing, but is, in some ways, designed to fail certain students, maybe reform isn't the answer.
Maybe invention is.
Invention, as in starting over.
That's the idea. The author points out, look, people like Leland Stanford and his peers built universities reflecting their worldviews, which were often quite exclusionary.
Sure.
So why shouldn't disabled and neurodivergent communities today craft their own vision of what higher education could be?
A completely different model.
She calls it revolutionary optimism. Imagine, just for a second, a college where learning isn't rushed, where time is elastic, where courses are built around real dialogue, storytelling, experimentation, not just standardized tests. A place where sensory regulation isn't an accommodation you have to fight for, but a shared practice of community care, where authenticity is actually welcomed, where, maybe the whimsical or unconventional is seen as part of making knowledge.
A place where autistic ways of knowing aren't just tolerated, but actually centered.
Exactly. And where nobody needs a ream of documentation just to prove their legitimacy or their need for support.
That sounds amazing. But would it even be recognized? Would it pass accreditation?
Probably not by current standards. Accreditation often measures efficiency, standardization, a very narrow kind of rigor.
Right.
But maybe, just maybe, the measure of success isn't reproducing the existing, often exclusionary model.
Maybe it's creating something that lives entirely outside of it.
The future of education, if it's truly going to include all of us, well, the argument is it won't be handed down by the current institution.
It'll have to be made, built, by those who are currently being left out.
That's the challenge, and the hope laid out.
A lot to think about there. What stands out to you from this deep dive? And maybe the bigger question for all of us is, how might we as a society start building the kinds of colleges we actually need, instead of just trying to adapt to the ones that, perhaps by design, end up excluding so many? Something to ponder as you continue your own learning journey.